Jeff Bezos, you've got all the money, you can do anything you want in the whole world, please don't ruin gaming. Why don't you go and invest in space travel or something? I mean, you got the funds, I think you'd really like it. Just please leave gaming alone. So why am I worried? Well, Amazon now have their brand new game streaming platform, Luna. And that means along with Microsoft and Google, there's all these Netflix-like business models for gaming. And their plan is to make sure that we never own a game again. That's the way they're headed. So let's talk about why this could ruin gaming, because this is actually quite serious. Hi, Stelden here. Ever since Stadia was announced, I've been keeping a really close eye on game streaming. If you don't really know what that is, which is fair enough, in some countries game streaming doesn't really exist because the internet, it's just far too slow. My country being included in that category, but basically you're running a game off of a company's hardware. So in Stadia's case, you buy their device, you purchase a game, and then instead of running it off hardware like a computer or a console, it's running off Google's servers. Kind of like Netflix, where it's not just a file stored on your computer, you've got to actually access Netflix itself, and you only watch it when they've given you access to it. The main problem in gaming is that the service barely works. Almost everyone who uses Stadia can admit that they've had problems when playing any game that requires little to no latency, and by that I simply mean you press a button, it doesn't register on the screen until like a second or two later. If you're playing anything from like a Dark Souls to a platformer type of game, having a delay when you press the dodge button is going to leave you having an absolutely bad time. It's easy to say that it's just a tech issue and in time this will be fixed, but I can tell you right now that the way these companies are going, they're going to want to dominate the market with their streaming services far before any technology that improves this situation is actually available. Even if tech gets better, there's almost no chance of us getting into a position where there's zero latency in games. This is why I've got a real fear. If these companies like Amazon and Google think streaming is the future, they're just going to design games in which latency is not a big deal. Now, for anyone who has watched my other videos, you know I absolutely love turn-based games. Divinity Original Sin, that's a great example, it's fantastic. But would you want to live in a world where every single game is turn-based and nothing really requires any real-time reactions? In the Google and Amazon-led world, that's likely what could be happen, it's a real possibility. There is an obvious counterpoint to that though, and I want to address that first. Is streaming a problem if it's just an alternative to PC or console gaming? What's the big deal if that's all it is? Well, a lot of these big companies seem to be gearing up to take streaming even further. They don't want to just have it sit there as a niche alternative. If we take a look at everything that Microsoft's doing with Xbox Game Pass, where you pay a monthly fee to download and play games but you never actually own them, it is very similar to the Amazon Luna model. That's put a lot of fear in my mind, as well as plenty of other people's, that eventually the time will come when Microsoft and Xbox will be a very similar streaming service to Luna and Stadia. Here's where the big problem lies. Microsoft are buying up a ton of video game developers, and tons of those are independent, like Obsidian, In Exile and Double Fine. Right now, every game they produce sits completely in Microsoft's hands as to when they release them. There is a chance in the future, and maybe not tomorrow, not next week, but in many years' time, that all those games come to an exclusive streaming platform. Where it gets even scarier is with Amazon's Luna in the mix on top of Stadia, there's a very real possibility of all of those companies buying up all these publishers and developers too, so they can all advertise exclusives on their platform. Xbox Games Pass looks like a great deal, but like with the Netflix model and the TV industry, how would you feel about having to pay $15 to 3 or 4 different companies every single month to access all of these games? It really starts to add up. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, Jeff Bezos, he's got all the money. If he wants, he can go out and buy Ubisoft, he can buy Sega, CD Projekt Red, and not saying that they necessarily want to be bought, but when there's a will, there's a way, and having those games tied off, not just as exclusives, but as titles that will only come to a streaming platform, completely undermines the integrity of games, and what we all love. If every single game was to be developed with latency in mind, therefore limiting a ton of mechanics and basically anything requiring quick reflexes or reaction time, it will kill creativity in the gaming industry long term, I've got no doubt about it. It's very interesting with Xbox actually, because when the Bethesda news came out, I was kind of excited because it meant that their games were at least guaranteed to come to PC for the foreseeable future. I see PC as the most open platform, so I think it's always important for consumers in general that games continue to release on it. On top of that, we now know that a game like Starfield cannot be a timed exclusive to the PlayStation, so that is another positive. But I do feel like PC gamers, maybe even gamers in general, had a short-term win there, but in the long run, it's really hard to say what could happen with so many of these studios under Microsoft's control. I've seen the word monopoly thrown around. I don't think it's going to be solely Microsoft in that monopoly. I think it could very well be Amazon and Google as well. I'm going to stress again, this is not something that's going to happen overnight. You don't need to panic, hide under the bed and think, oh no, I'm only going to be able to stream games. This is a gradual process. It's the kind of thing that likely isn't going to face much backlash until the problem is really evident. And by then, it's probably going to be too late for just the average gamer to really do anything about it or find an alternative. If all of the big publishers are out there are also partnered with companies prioritizing streaming services, where are the other games going to come from that release on just hardware? I'm sure Nintendo, they'll keep doing what they're doing, and PlayStation, they'll likely stay in the home console market, but all of those different third-party developers and publishers you might think of, they could well be locked off with specific streaming services. To give an example, Warner Bros. Games was in talks to get bought by Microsoft at some point, which would mean a ton of IPs that one day you potentially couldn't play on Steam, PS4, or wherever else you might enjoy. You would have to play them on a streaming device. You couldn't even own the games. Now, I understand that plenty of people may hear all this and simply think that, look, none of this is going to happen. Microsoft and these companies, they can still release games on Steam on top of doing their streaming service, and that way they're making money in two different places. What's to worry about that? I want to clarify it so you understand exactly why I'm worried and why I think it affects gamers as a whole. This is something I've been thinking about for a long time. It's not a knee-jerk reaction to the Luna news. I've been thinking about this for years. For starters, Microsoft want to be the PR kings right now. They've completely shifted directions. At first, and this is going back all the way to the original Xbox days, they wanted to compete with Sony. Now they're trying to build a completely different sort of service, and that will primarily compete with Amazon and Google. But it's a much bigger competitive war than they ever had with the likes of Sony or Nintendo, and there is far more money at play. All of these companies, they're infinitely bigger than Sony. In building this service, they're almost giving games away. Game Pass on PC, it's like $5 right now. Do you think they're profiting off of a 4-5 year long dev cycled game with 300 staff working on it? All those wages, all that rent, do you think they make a profit at the end of the day off selling it to you for $5 a month? No. This is a means to an end, and I truly think that Microsoft's end goal is stream only. They've got the tech already with CloudX, they know it's too early, so even for the next 10-15 years, yeah sure, we might still get the physical releases. But one day it's going to stop and their games will very likely be Game Pass only, and that means rent only. It's the exact same for Stadia. Eventually those games, they're going to move to rent only, and Luna hasn't even tried to hide. You pay a monthly fee and you can't buy anything permanently. And that means consumers are in a pretty dire position, because you'll have to subscribe to these services to play games, and if there's even only one game from one of those companies that you're interested in, you still have to sign up. You can't wait for a sale, there's no way you can support the devs that you like individually, it all goes into one big pot, which is horrible. Especially given all of these games, they're going to be designed around being stream friendly. No quick reflex games that undermine the service, they're not going to be allowed. And I could be wrong about that last part, but that means when you're playing a shooter, expect to press the button and then suddenly you're dead and you're going, what the fuck happened? Oh, it was all that latency, it's just fucked me over. Fantastic. This doesn't need to happen. Mainstream gamers or people who just dabble, they're never going to give a shit about my fears or anyone else's fears in this area. They aren't that invested in gaming and they'll probably live with this, it's not really going to affect them. But if you love niche games and you love lots of different types of games like I do, then this is going to be a real worry. There's already a lot of controversy when it comes to games that force you to be online or even just check in once to play their single player component. The way out of this, I feel, comes down to indie development. The good news right now is when you look at a game like Hollow Knight, a fantastic Metroidvania by the way, it's a game that only gets noticed after it releases and everyone loves it. Companies like Amazon and Google, they're completely out of touch with the hardcore gaming market. They're very unlikely to spot potential hits early. And if you want proof of this, look at the game Among Us. It's the biggest game in the PC landscape right now, there's tons and tons of people streaming it, there's millions of people playing it on Steam. That game came out in 2017 and it only became a hit a few months ago. All of those big companies, they would be spewing that they didn't jump on this game, buy the little company, I think it's like a 3 or 4 man development team, and then release it under their own name and their own brand and make all the money off it. The fact that they cannot spot these games early tells you that they haven't covered everything, and we can beat them in that aspect. I love RPGs, and I mostly cover them on this channel, that's usually what it's about. So if we look at titles like Pathfinder, Atom RPG, Underrail, fantastic indie RPGs for anyone who hasn't checked them out, These are what save gaming, because they're always going to release for hardware, and the gaming industry will only grow in the right way if more people support smaller titles from smaller developers, rather than just rushing out to buy the flavour of the month like an Assassin's Creed game. Those are the sorts of games that are going to continue to be watered down so they're streamer friendly. We've already seen Ubisoft partner with Amazon's Luna, that's a thing now, so I'd be keeping an eye on those games, and see if anything is compromised in order to please Jeff Bezos and make sure that their streaming capabilities aren't undermined. If I was being realistic, I would say the late 2020s is when we're going to start to see Microsoft, Amazon and Google all having a purely big streaming focus, and they're going to be competing with each other directly. Microsoft will have their Bethesda games, Google seem to have a timed exclusive strategy, and obviously Amazon have Luna, but they do have some challenges ahead, such as their New World MMO being a bit of a joke, so maybe they'll fall out of the race, who knows, but they will absolutely keep spending money. The worst thing about that is that some of them will most certainly do an EA. They'll buy up developers or publishers with a great reputation and have them make games exclusively for their services. But what'll happen is the core audience won't be there, so they won't buy them. And even if they do, they'll likely have a sour experience due to latency issues. And then the company, like Amazon, they'll spit the dev out into the rubbish pile, just like EA used to do with Westwood Studios, the Command & Conquer developer. They killed them. They did it to so many different devs, and that is one of my main concerns. Great devs being taken away from their core audiences to try and win over more old school types, and then blaming the said studio when Amazon don't get their return on investment. It is gross. This is an industry that is meant to have artistic integrity. But these big companies, they're desperate to treat games as if they're all mobile phone titles. They're designed to waste your time, but they never bring any fulfillment beyond that. That's what they think about every game. They've got zero respect for upcoming titles like Baldur's Gate 3. They couldn't give a shit about Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. All of these upcoming games that have passionate fans behind them. It's very simple. If these companies think that by buying these studios or publishers they can force people to have to subscribe to their streaming service, then they're going to do it. They don't care if you'll have an absolutely awful experience compared to what you would if the game was on a regular gaming device. That is of no concern to them. They're not at all about providing value, they just want to force you to pay them, or you're going to miss out. It's that direct. Like I said, Microsoft are playing the long game. They want to position themselves as the good guys in gaming, but let me tell you this, spending $7.5 billion on a gaming publisher means you have massive plans in store, and they didn't do it just to give PC gamers a good deal. They've got streaming on their mind and they want to corner the market that way. They want to do it in such a way that gamers go into it positively. They don't feel like they're being forced, but really they are. It is no different than the Epic Games Store. Eventually, I think it's going to get to the same place. Now, I'm absolutely aware that at this point, I probably deserve to have a tinfoil hat on my head, but I do want to at least try and make gamers realise that Game Pass, all of these streaming services, they're not designed to be pro-consumer in the long run. These insanely cheap deals are like Epic's free games every month on PC. They're simply not your friend. They just want to condition you to a certain way of life, so when things start to get anti-consumer, you're too far gone to go back to the old way. And in Game Pass's case, or Luna's case, they simply want control over what you can and can't play. They don't want you to simply be able to buy a product and judge it. And just lastly, yes, I know that if you read Steam's terms and conditions, it says something quite similar, that you don't own the product, you're just renting it, but I think we all know that this is a little bit different. I'm someone who's a massive fan of DRM-free games. I'll always go to GOG first when it comes to buying a new PC game, and that's because I want to support developers and companies who go to DRM-free platforms first, rather than having us deal with the crap that comes with Steam and Denuvo and all of that. If we have like Game Pass, we have Luna, we have all of those, I can just tell you that the gaming experience, it's going to be even worse. Denuvo is going to be the absolute tip of the iceberg when it comes to all this stuff. I know it's not going to happen right now, I know I've stressed that, but it is going to come eventually, and we're going to have to push back against it as gamers if it's not just going to become mainstream accepted. That's what's happened with microtransactions, it happened to an extent with loot boxes, haven't seen them as much, I guess, in big games recently, but I'm sure they'll make a comeback as well. So we do have to take a bit of a stand, and that comes from supporting smaller games and showing what we care about. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please comment, like, and subscribe. I'll see you on the next one. Thanks very much, and bye-bye.